event. My name is Kai Bird, and I'm the director of the Leon Levy Center for Biography, a wholly unique institution hosted by the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and founded by Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation in the year 2007. I want to thank Shelby for her steadfast support to the Biography Center. It is her vision that makes this program possible. Please note that our next event will take place on February 2nd at 4 p.m. Please note the unusual hour, 4 p.m., not 6 p.m., because we will be talking with the British author, Carol Angier, who will be speaking about her new biography of W.G. Sebald. Angier will be in conversation with our very own Thad Zilkowski. Please mark your calendars and register for this event on the Leon Levy website. And please encourage your friends and relatives to subscribe to our digital mailing list on our website. But tonight, I'm delighted to introduce the veteran biographer, Cathy Curtis, who will be talking about her brand new biography of Elizabeth Hardwick. She will be in conversation with Ian Buruma. Cathy Curtis is the author of 3 biographies of women artists, all published by Oxford University Press: Restless Ambition, Grace Hartigan, painter; A Generous Vision, The Creative Life of Elaine de Kooning; and the 3rd biography, Alive Still, Nell Blaine, American painter. Ian Buruma, a regular contributor to and former editor of the New York Review of Books, is the author of, among other works,
Out again, start again, leave meeting.
Behind the Mask, God's Dust, Playing the Game, and Murder in Amsterdam, The Death of Theo van Gogh, and The Limits of Tolerance. Buruma has won several prizes for his books, including the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the Penn Diamondstein Spielvogel Award for the art of the essay for Theater of Cruelty, Art, Film, and the Shadows of War. Please look for all of these books at bookshops.org, a website that will lead you to your local independent bookstore. Curtis and Buruma will be in conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and then we will take questions from our virtual audience. Please click on the question box, the chat box below, to type in your questions, and Ian will be sure to get to as many as he can. He will be fielding the questions. We will try to end this program after about 1 hour. Again, thanks to the Leon Levy Foundation for funding this and all our other events. And now I turn this conversation over to Ian Buruma. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you and good evening. Hello, Cathy. It's a pleasure to do this interview. One might as well start with obvious questions and hope to get a bit more complicated later. I'm curious in why you picked Elizabeth Hardwick as a subject, since it's often commented on that she herself was very wary of biographies and so on. What interested you in her particularly?
Well, perhaps fortunately, I didn't realize that she didn't like biographies when I began this enterprise. You know, the thing is that she's one of a group of, not a formal group, but a group of women in America who wrote independently in mid-century about the culture, as they wrote about the cultures as women, one could say, and they didn't have, none of them really had an axe to grind. They were not ideological. They were not writing the female eunuch, for example. So who are these women? Susan Sontag, Joan Didion, Mary McCarthy, and I think Renata Adler belongs there too, although she of course is still living and is rather more polemical, I think. But anyway, so the thing is, you know, Sontag, Didion, McCarthy, the books have been written, the biographies. And one of my sort of desiderata for writing biographies is that I need to be first. I want to write the first biography. And I have some other, the other things sort of in my informal checklist, it has to be somebody who has made an important contribution to an artistic field of either visual arts, and now I'm moving on to literature. I have to be interested in their work. I have to feel some kind of kinship with it. And there must be an archive. And she does have an archive. There's sort of two archives. The major one for her is at the Ransom Center, and the other one is at the Houghton Library at Harvard, which is really the Lowell archive, but there's material there too one has to read. So anyway, I was very interested in actually writing about her a few years back, and then I learned that my then agent had told me that someone else was writing a book called The Two Mrs. Lowells. And so she had a contract from a major publisher, and I needed to look elsewhere. And I've since been in contact with this person, and she is her book is actually The Four Mrs. Lowells. I guess mom is the fourth one, Lowell's mother. I mean, and her book is coming out next year. But anyway, I didn't know that, and years are going by, and the book hadn't appeared, and so it just seemed, that I could embark on this. And she really, of course, is formidable. And I didn't quite realize what I was getting into in the beginning, because she's read everything. And I was madly trying to catch up with her. And of course, I've not read, half of what she had read. Anyway, it's a long-winded answer to your question.
Well, even though you hadn't read everything she read, what is the nature of the kinship you felt with her?
Well, as a person, I was her sort of indomitableness, if that's a word, her ability to carry on despite having been married to a very difficult, yes, famous, yes, gifted, but very difficult man. I mean, that as a biographer, the life comes first for me, and that's all wound up with my feeling that biography is really about narrative. I mean, you have to keep the narrative going. Of course, you must write about the work of the person, and you care about it, and you've thought about it, but you can't go on for pages and pages about it, because then you're moving away from your narrative. And I realize there are many ways to write biography, but this is my way. And so, I mean, of all her works, Sleepless Nights, is my favorite. I've read it over and over and over, and I just find it extraordinary in its, I don't know, the way she, the way she looks at the lives of so many different sorts of people, their inability to communicate, or their inability to sort of make their way in the world. And I also, kind of jumping ahead here perhaps, but I think even if one has not read or seen, let's say, a play of Ibsen's, or can't really recall the Brontes novels very well, or whatever, there's so much more in Elizabeth Hardwick. There are her wonderful short stories. There's her writing about civil rights, and her writing about cities, Boston, New York, Lexington, her writing about Maine, gorgeous writing about what it is, the sort of inscrutable nature of the land and the people of Maine, about book reviewing, about theater in New York. So I think there's just so much there that beyond what people normally think of, the writing about literary works, which is important, and it's interesting and all of that. But I'm just, I want to say that I write, I'm not writing for somebody, I'm not writing to sort of get into an argument with the people who already know her. I was writing this book to introduce her to people who've never even heard of her, perhaps, and who would, be interested in reading, maybe not Seduction and Betrayal, her famous book of literary criticism, but maybe her, the collected short stories or the collected essays.
Yeah, one of the things that you were talking about, a generation of women, and indeed that is a real subject. They didn't all think alike, obviously. Their politics are not necessarily always the same, even though they would all be classified as liberals in the American sense of the word. But they had one thing in common, I think, and Hardwick in particular, although not in particular, Susan Sontag and Janet Malcolm and also, which was a deep commitment to prose, to style, and to literature. What they cared much more about that than they would have about a political message or using literature for a cause, even though they may have supported many worthy causes, which in some ways makes them not an anachronism, but it's very difficult to imagine them being very happy with the way the culture is today, where there is a very different, there's a lot of pressure on literature with very different demands, that it has to focus on social justice, that it has to represent certain voices and so on. Now, at the same time, there's a big revival of interest in Elizabeth Hardwick. Do you think the people who are interested in her despite the fact that she stood for something that is perhaps not entirely fashionable, or because of it, that people are looking for a voice like hers in the present climate?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, it seems to me that the cult of Elizabeth Hardwick is a very ivory tower cult, and people are terribly, terribly interested in whether it was the last word in the sentence that was the key word, or, her paratactic method of writing, quay writing. I mean, all of this sort of thing. I mean, there seems to be an interest in her writing divorced from the world. I mean, and what nobody's talking about are her articles about Watts, or her articles about civil rights. Nobody mentions that. I mean, all my reviews, not one mention of that kind of writing. So I just think that people to whom she particularly appeals like her for her distance from all of this, from the world, as it were.
But do you think that's the way she thought? Because I don't think she would have regarded literature and what literature represented as something that belonged to some kind of other world in a remote ivory tower. I think she thought it was very much of the world. Yes.
I mean, because her observation, she's not a philosopher. She's someone who spends a lot of time closely looking, and she writes about what she sees and how what that means to her. But it's not, and what she sees. I mean, she did so much writing, for the New York Review of Books, as you know, about trials, the Menendez trial, OJ. So she was very much in the world. And I decided to take an entire page of my book just listing all the petitions that she signed, for the rights of people in different countries who were being persecuted. And I was a little worried a bit that it was boring to read it, but I just wanted to present in one place her passion for, for liberty, for for justice.
Yes, but I think that her idea of liberty very much included the liberty of the written word, of the freedom to think and the freedom to speak and so on. I mean, even in the articles that you mentioned, and I agree with you that they're wonderful on Watts and on Martin Luther King and that kind of thing. But first of all, they're always impeccably stylish. But also, she never reduced them to one polemical point or to promote one particular cause. She was always observing carefully and looking for the complications in things, which again seems to me would seem to make her unfashionable now, but perhaps you don't feel that way.
I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting question, but
And
I-
by
I-
unfashionable, I don't mean that as a criticism, quite the opposite.
I don't quite know how to answer your question, to be honest. I mean, I mean, personally, I dislike so much about the world as it is today. As so she's kind of a refuge in a way. I mean, she, of course, died not all that very long ago, but, came to prominence during the Partisan Review days, and the 40s, the 50s. I feel nostalgic, for that period, in a way.
Well, I think you've answered my question.
Okay.
That she is a refuge, perhaps, to many people who admire her for all the right reasons, rather than something else. But I think that's interesting. A big part of her story, of course, is her marriage to Robert Lowell. As a biographer, I'm interested in how you approach that, because you seem to thrive on feeling a great deal of sympathy for the people you're describing. When we were in a discussion before we started this session, you said you would find it very difficult to write a biography of somebody you didn't sympathize with. From your book, I don't get the impression you had a great deal of sympathy for Robert Lowell.
No.
You certainly admire him as a poet and so on. So, but then you do have to describe in a way that's persuasive to readers why he meant so much to her. And so clearly there was something about him that was so compelling that she stuck with him through thick and thin. How do you feel about that?
Well, it is a mystery in a way, but then we never know about people's marriages, do we? Really? I mean, there's no way. The thing is, she admired him as a poet. She admired his brilliance, and that in itself seemed to carry her through the very, very difficult times she had. I mean, not of his own volition, often not of his own making, because he had a mental illness, but even when he wasn't going through the throes of that, the remarks he made to her, the rudeness, he was terribly self-centered, and it just particularly when they were traveling in Europe in the early 1950 to 52. I mean, it was just extraordinary how little he felt. She had to do everything to just keep that household together, and he would, he was reading his Fromentin. He was, interested in, in the history of the places where they went, and that's very nice. But there were the practical everyday problems, and he just did not want to involve himself in them. And yet somebody had to, and that was always Elizabeth.
Well, that is true, but you talked about narratives and that you have to find a story. She chose that. I mean,
Yes.
she chose to stick with him. It's hard to imagine that you would stick with somebody who was intolerable just because you tell yourself, well, after all, he is a great poet. I mean, there must have been more to him than that. So how would you convey that?
Well, I mean, she did find him, when he was not ill. He was amusing, he was charming, and he loved her. I mean, there was just that kind of bond. I mean, I'm really hard put to put a finger on it exactly. I mean, it was just she just really, though, was enthralled to his brilliance, and I think that's what carried her through. I mean, in my book, there are many, many excerpts from many, many letters in which she says, I can't take it anymore. I think this is it. To letters to friends who knew the both of them. But it was, he just was too marvelous, as a creative person. I really do think, I mean, I am not the kind of writer who inquires about people's sex lives. So, I don't know what that was like. I really don't. But I don't know. I mean, it is kind of a mystery. It really is. When things got to be really, really bad, the many, many sort of pseudo mistresses he had, and then the real one, this woman he was going to have her come, and live with him, a European woman. Yeah,
one interesting thing I think about their relationship is her comment, and again, you never know what people rarely thought and so on, but her comment on the famous poem based on her letters to him and their daughter and so on, which was obviously a very hurtful thing to have done. Her private life, her private thoughts were publicized in that way and so on. And some people might have been so devastated they had to go and they would have divorced that person instantly or had to go and see a shrink for the rest of their lives or whatever. Her comment was that the greatest disappointment about the poem was that it was such a bad poem, which tells you something about how committed she was, again, to come back to my earlier question, to the written word, to prose, to literature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was everything.
Would you agree?
Yes, of course. It was everything to her. And I think that is part of the reason, I mean, you're sort of questioning it, and it does sound, well, yes, okay, she believed he was in his greatness, but come on, you can't eat that for breakfast, I mean, what does that really mean? But I do think that's what carried her through. I mean, she just believed in his greatness as a writer, as a.
Do you think that it also fitted into her kind of childhood romance, that she grew up in Kentucky, rather provincial, dreamt as a young bookish girl of life in New York and amongst literary people, amongst people who read books as much as she did, and so on and so forth, that he in some way answered her childhood dreams and the dreams, her dreams of what she one day wanted to be?
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. I didn't think of her as somebody with lots of dreams, just a lot of determination to, obviously leave Lexington, Kentucky. And at that point she came to New York to graduate school, and she was studying in the English poets of the 18th century, I think it was. I didn't really see it that way. That's very interesting. I mean,
well, you described it. I mean, your descriptions of her childhood in Kentucky are very much of somebody who's living in a different world from the one her family was in.
Oh, well, yes.
And was yearning for the life that in the end she led.
Well, yes, but I mean, she could have married all sorts of men. I mean, she was attractive. She was, interesting to be with. Her southernness was exotic, and she fit in amazingly well to the bickering partisan review men, that world. But I mean, I thought you meant that's drew her. I mean, she was interested in a number of men of the, of the group, of the period, other writers.
Yes, but I won't belabor this point any further. But of course, he was not quite like other men. I mean, even the very bright people who wrote for the Partisan Review, they were not great poets. He was one of the great poets of his time. And so in some ways, one can see why he, rather than many other men, would have been an attraction, perhaps.
Yes. But one thing I found so interesting is, here's this woman who is the 8th of 11 children in a poor family, and she marries the only child of a wealthy family. And there's just so much difference in your expectations of what life is. And, she always worried about money. And that was something that connected her to poor people, to the cleaners she had. I mean, here's a woman who always thought of herself really as poor, and yet, of course, you know, she had a nurse for her daughter, and she had people to clean her house. But yes, of course, Lowell was very special. I mean, yes, I'm not trying to say he wasn't, but you know, well, he wasn't the only man, though, who, you know, whom she could have married.
No, no, of course not. There was also another side to her, which I found interesting, having known her a little bit, which was that there was a very, on the one hand, there was that very high-minded love of literature and so on, which I think she certainly had in common with Susan Sontag and other writers and women of her generation. But there was an earthy side to her too. And I wonder how much of that you picked up on yourself, in that I remember at a dinner party with lots of intellectuals in New York and New York Review people, and they were discussing, I think, Proust and influences on Proust. And suddenly she piped up and started talking about the semi-final at Wimbledon, and that Boris Becker had been so wonderful. And there was a moment of sort of stunned silence around the table. There was that side of her as well.
She happened to love tennis all her life. You know, I mean, that's just something that, but, you know, what I loved about her, you know, I'd never met her, so I don't have that sort of relationship with her, if you will, but I loved her Southernness. It would just pop out. I mean, when she taught at Barnard, and she was very critical of the writing of her good students, the ones who, you know, went on to real careers. But then there were other students who, a couple of them who were Southerners, and one of them I know has had a career. I don't mean to impugn her, but she could kind of relax with them. You know, she could be a Southern gal with them. And I thought that was very endearing. And then late in her life, with this young man who befriended her in Castine, Maine, and she would just have all these sort of catty things to say about, you know, the residents of Castine. There'd be a group of cars parked outside a home, and you know, and she was amused to find out that it was some kind of a prayer meeting, or that's what she said it was. I just her sort of caustic. She apparently, I mean, could be really caustic and negative. And when she sat on committees for you know, literary prizes, or people who just couldn't stand her, because apparently it would be, well, I have spoken, and so that's it. You know, there's no need to have another remark from anyone.
But I think that again points to her fastidiousness. I mean, that what she rarely cared about was good writing, and not necessarily the message, but the way it was done. And she felt extremely strongly about that. Hence also her remark about Lowell's poem, which was so hurtful in many other ways. But let me ask you, as a seasoned biographer of many different people, very different people, a more general question, which comes up, of course, a lot today, which is the relationship between somebody's personal life, somebody's sort of character in their daily personal life, and the work they do. And I think one of the reasons some writers, W.H. Auden, I think, was one, I think Hardwick was another, tend to be very skeptical about biography, is that they feel there's the work, and then there's the person who gets up in the morning and has breakfast and is very nice to his children, or nasty to his children, or what beats his wife, or is very nice to his wife, and so on and so forth. But those two should never be confused. They're different parts of the same person. There's the work, and then there's the life, and the life is really irrelevant to the work. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I'm absolutely opposed to that idea. I'm sorry. I mean, because let's face it, I mean, yes, I know I read my, you know, those critics when I was in college, you know, that say there's an absolute divide. But come on, I mean, you know, her early fiction was so much about her own life. And I mean, her life was everywhere. Her life, I mean, the way I look at it is the way I write the book is that the life feeds the work, and then the critical reaction to the work feeds the life again. And I see it as a circular thing. I don't see this division. I think it's arbitrary and false.
Yes, but on the other hand, there are people who behave appallingly and insensitively and so on in their life, and their work can show enormous tenderness and sensitivity. I mean, that there can be an enormous divide, and so sometimes to explain the work through the behavior of life can also be misleading, and so and this makes the relations between the life and the work complicated. So I was just wondering how, as a biographer, you would approach that.
Well, I'm talking about the incidents of the life. The incidents of the life feed the work. I mean, that's at least in her life. All three of her novels were based absolutely on her own experiences. I'm not talking about character traits or that sort of thing. I'm talking about the lived life. I mean, the things you experienced from your childhood to your adolescence to your adulthood. I just don't.
Well, of course, but once the experience is filtered onto a page through the mind of a writer, it's no longer the raw experience. It's the experience described and thought about, distorted, changed in memory, and so on. So it becomes a different thing. And the thing it becomes can be very different from the actual experience, even though there may be factual resemblances.
Well, I'm writing now about Edna O'Brien, and I have to say, it's really directly, I mean, yes, the method of its telling, I mean, the literary devices are what they are, but she poured her life often directly into the books. I mean, I know a lot about her life, and I've read all the books, and it's just there. I mean, it is transformed. It's not every single fact. Some things are changed, but in fact, she was criticized, Edna was, for constantly writing about herself in her novels. And there was a point at which she began to write about other subjects. And I think that was important for her to kind of move on, as it were. But I guess I seem to be missing something here, I suppose. But I mean,
no, the question is not whether the extent. I'm not asking about the extent to which the work is based on experiences in the life. More that the work can represent a sensibility that may not be there in the daily life. So that was what in daily life manifests itself as unpleasant behavior. In the work can actually be transformed into something very different, something better, if you like. Now, that means that if you look at the work, you would have to judge it differently from if you actually look at the way people have actually behaved in their lives. Now, that presents an interesting problem to a biographer, I think. No?
Well, do you think you could give me an example of this?
Well, yes, I think, for example, I mean, there's been a lot of writing about that recently because there's a new book out, but the life of Picasso. Picasso undoubtedly mistreated many of the women in his life, often behaved appallingly, selfishly, and so on. But when it's transformed into his art, you can't say the art is bad or evil or monstrous.
Well, not bad, but it's in the art as well. I mean,
yes, it is, but it's in the art in a way that it's transformed in a way that can make it uplifting and enriching, etc., etc. And so if you were then to look at a painting of, let's say, somebody who he was once married to, he had an affair with or was married to, who's crying in the painting can be a thing of great beauty and humanity and so on, even though the actual events it was based on have been very unpleasant.
I guess I just don't really agree with you there. I wasn't expecting this sort of analogy or No, I mean, I think those paintings are pretty awful. Those paintings of because you can't divorce. I can't divorce the life from the work. They're intertwined in a way that, I'm no expert on Picasso, but I mean, the cruelty of it is there. The cruelty.
Absolutely, but cruelty is very much part of human life. So the question then is that things which can make life for others impossible and which can be monstrous and so on, in the hands of a great writer or a great artist, in their work can be transformed into something very different and something that is valuable. And since anger, rage, cruelty, and so on are very much part of life, the question then is, okay, so how is it transformed in the art? Which is a different question from how does it manifest itself in a marriage or a relationship or in real life? Do you see? Do you get what I mean?
Yes, I guess so, but I those are not, well, yes, but I really I don't know what to say. I really don't. I don't have a response to this.
What do you think her greatest, Elizabeth Hardwick, I'm talking about
Yes,
now,
yes.
her greatest legacy has been, if you were to sort of reflect on it as a writer?
I think the variousness of her interests, that she was able to write so interestingly about such a huge range of topics, and also to write so interestingly about lives, about I mean, her first two novels are really negligible. They're really not worth, considering very seriously in the whole panoply of her work. But, in the short stories, just the way she would capture the way New Yorkers, not being one, I could say, the sort of extraordinary aspects of different kinds of New Yorkers colliding with one another. It's her, the way she was able to transmute what she observed into writing that just has a lasting quality that we still decades later can recognize people like that and understand situations that she depicted.
You went from Elizabeth Harduck to Edna O'Brien. Why that transition?
Well, unlike Elizabeth Hardwick, whom I've known, quote unquote, who's I've only read for a few years, Edna O'Brien has been a favorite of mine ever since I was in my 30s, and I've just always loved her writing, and I'm just fascinated at her life. She's an autodidact. She never, she left her convent school, graduated from it at age 15, and then educated herself in the classics, and as a person, she's so various. She's so emotional and so instinctual and so vibrant, and as a writer, she's so marvelously fresh. On the one hand, she's the Irish bardic tradition is something that lives in her writing, and the rhythms of it, and the she's very sensual and very romantic, and I mean, it's a different kind of it's sort of my passion for her and her writing is it's more, I don't know, more I don't know what the word is, just instinctual, or I mean, she's just a force of nature, really. And I was very interested to see her, as I said before, she wrote much about herself, and then she began to pursue issues to do with Irish politics, and she did very well there. And then her probably last book, I mean, her last book and probably the last book she will write, about a girl captured by the Boko Haram in Nigeria. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. She completely changed her style to write that book, pared it down because she was always a really voluptuous writer, but she pared down her style to just an essence. And I just think it's just an extraordinary achievement. And to think that she did the research. She took 2 trips to Nigeria in her mid 80s and wrote this book, you know, in her late 80s. It's fantastic.
Very, very admirable. I mean, she did get some flack for it, didn't she? I mean, people
Yes.
criticized her for trespassing on a subject that she shouldn't have, and so on. What do you feel about that?
Oh, I think that's all nonsense, really. As she says, anyone should be able to write about anything. I mean, I just absolutely do not believe in siloing, you know, subjects as, you know, you have to be of a certain race to write it, or you have to be, you know, of a, you know, be from a certain country. If you're not a Nigerian, what do you know? You know, yes, she only visited twice. She did spend quite a bit of time though. And she, you know, she spoke with people, she spoke with aid workers, and, you know, she did a great deal of research for all her books that had to do with Irish politics as well. She did a lot of research, and no, I just think that's all nonsense.
Now, you also sound a bit old-fashioned too, and I mean that as a compliment. But I mean, what you're saying is not
Yeah,
the
no, I know. Well, but I mean, I'm in my early 70s, and
Well,
yeah, I know I don't quite look at, but yeah, I just think so much of what goes on today is just, you know, and I'm a liberal, whatever that means, but you know, I just don't agree with a lot of it.
Well, that may be a good moment to ask for some questions, since we've got a little time left. I don't see anything in the chat box. Does that mean there are no questions, or where are we?
That?
There's a question from Thad. Okay.
Oh, we're back.
Okay. Well, Thad would like to you to say a little bit more about something that you began to talk about earlier, which was the narrative value of biography. And some people would say the biography is really not just another way to write a novel. Do you think there's something to that?
Well, I guess I'm a novelist manqué. If I could write novels, I would write novels, and a lot of people would be happier, I suppose, not to have their lives picked at. But I just believe in, I mean, there is a big difference between a chronology and a narrative. You know, it's not that I'm just compiling facts that I trot out year after year after year. I mean, there is some art to it, at least that's what I aim for. But I do believe that biography should have a force to it, should be compelling, should be a page turner. I'm often disappointed in biographies, some of, you know, important biographies that have won prizes that people love. And I think, oh gosh, I mean, there's all this dull stuff in it. Couldn't they have said it faster, quicker? I want to move on to the interesting stuff. You know, I want action. I want drama. I mean, because also I would never write about somebody's life, you know, somebody who just sort of sat in a room and wrote or painted or something. I don't know what I could do with that. And I also, the thing about biography is though that it is chronological, and some critics, you know, want you to write a thematic book, you know, where each chapter has a theme. And to me, that's lit crit, and that's not what I'm doing. This is a biography. This is about a life. And I think that even a biography of a literary person, I mean, it's absurd to quantify things, but I think it's really like 70% life and 30% work, not 50-50. And certainly, I sort of think, you know, those parental advisory stickers that you find on, you know, I don't know, there are no CDs anymore, right? But well, I think there should be sort of a sticker on my next book. This is not literary criticism. This is a biography, because you know, that's just not what I do. I'm interested in the life, and the life, you know, as I've said before.
Except the only reason you would write about, let's say, Hardwick, is because of her work. I mean, there are many women who've been in impossible marriages,
Oh, yes.
living with impossible men. But the reason that she merits a book is what she wrote, and nothing.
Yes,
nothing
yes,
else.
of course.
Right.
But I want to interest people. I mean, this is not a book for the cultists, really, you know, and I didn't even realize what a cult figure she was. I also didn't realize, you know, that there is, oddly, or maybe not, I don't know, there's no book of literary criticism about Hardwick per se. And I didn't realize that going into it. Whereas with Edna O'Brien, there's been a great deal of work done on her. But yes, but it's the life that's got to carry the book. I mean, you know, I did get reviews that said, well, you know, where's the you know, why didn't I do more criticism of her, or more analysis, that is, of her work? But it's in there. The quotes that I chose from her work are chosen for a reason. I mean, I'm conveying something, I hope, by choosing those quotes. And I do have things to say. I mean, I mentioned that how Elizabeth Hardwick wrote a wonderful phrase about Joan Didion, that her writing has abrupt closures, like hanging up the phone without notice. Yes, yes. I mean, there's no point in glossing that. I mean, you just go, yes, that's right. Or, you know, the sort of ecclesiastical metaphor that she wrote about Simone Weil, that her life was as if it were on panels of stained glass, or what she wrote about Catherine Sloper in Washington, in the novel Washington Square, that she was as alone as an animal in the field. And I thought, oh, what a marvelous, I mean, you know, Washington Square, it's in New York. Yes, it's the 19th century in New York. It didn't have nearly so many people in it. But what a marvelous evocation of this poor woman in the novel. So, you know, I do write about these things, but not, and I don't take pages and pages and pages to analyze any one particular.
There are various other questions. One is, which event in her life did you find most hardest to narrate?
Which event? I can't really answer that question. I mean, I often found it difficult to write about her writing of certain, as you know, there were certain, I really struggled to figure out what to say about some of her writing. That was the hard part, but her life, well, I mean, as a biographer, the early life is often difficult because you have to piece together lots of little bits and pieces of information. What I really rely on are letters, and she wasn't obviously writing any letters when she was living at home in Lexington, Kentucky. So yes, it was a question. Well, I went to Lexington, and you know, and I went walked her streets and went to the public library and looked up the old phone books to find out more about her, you know, her father, the plumber, and all of it. I love that work. You know, so that, yes, I suppose the difficulty was to figure out how to string it together and make it a narrative when I just had little, you know, bits and pieces.
The other question, which perhaps is related, is how you go about your work with collecting your various sources, and that would include talking to people who knew the person you're writing about, how was it in this case? I mean, how close were you to some of the people who knew her, members of her family? Were you able to talk to them?
No. She has just the one child. I mean, obviously Lowell died before she did, and she had all those brothers and sisters, but she was the eighth, and she died at an advanced age of 91. So her daughter I wrote to her snail mail. I believe very much in snail mail. I don't even have Harriet's email address. And Harriet Lowell wrote back that she just wasn't going to not cooperate, but I mean she just didn't want to be interviewed, and that was that. And then I worried intensely after I'd written the book about permissions. Permissions are just a huge issue, and having previously only written books for Oxford, which is believes implicitly in fair use. When you write a book for a trade publisher, and also I understand for certain other academic publishers, you have to get permission for the quotes from the letters. So there were all those letters, from Elizabeth Hardwick that I just had to have, and so of course Harriet had to. It's through an agency, literary agency, but Harriet had to had to agree, and I was very, very tense about that, but she did agree. And so the people I got to speak to were her students at Barnard, really. People who were young enough to still be around. Well, and also there was an elderly friend of hers, and when I was in Castine, I went to the I just had to experience Castine, and what a marvelous, just so quiet, so austere. I was there in the summer, and yet there wasn't a soul walking on the streets. I mean, but anyway, I was at the Historical Society, and I think the very nice woman who runs that had tipped off somebody, and somebody came by and who had known Elizabeth, and through her I met other people, most of whom I had to just speak to on the phone or through email. But did I speak to the New York Review crowd? No, it just didn't come out that way. Somebody who has written about her, Ian knows this, I've said this before, but simply refused to speak to me.
Is this a common experience in your life as a biographer, or was this a particularly difficult task?
There's always difficulty, it seems to me. I mean, with my three artists, the last one, her last lover is a very nice woman who really befriended me and was very nice to me, and helped me in many ways. And the first artist I wrote about, Grace Hartigan, I had problems with her executor, who was the executive of her estate, who was who teaches at, he was a pupil of hers and teaches at the Maryland College Institute of Art, where she taught. And I interviewed him. It went very well, I thought, and then he got very difficult. And you just never know with people. In that case, I was talking to, that worked out. I mean, there were a lot of people for that one. I really depend more on archives than people, even though I was a reporter years ago. I like archival work, just it's just you and the documents.
Another question is, who, as a biographer yourself, you particularly admire as a biographer? Are there biographies that you sort of think of as the kind of Bible of biography?
I'm sorry, but I'm not going there. I don't do lists of my favorites. And I did mention a biography I like very much because of its enormous honesty, and that was Patrick French's biography, The World is What It Is, of V.S. Naipaul. It's an author, the word authorized is in the title of it. And it was so remarkable to me that, he was able, French was, to write about, in this case, Naipaul's extraordinarily awful treatment of his English wife. That's the part I really remember from this book more than, whatever French had to say about, A Bend in the River or any other book of his. It just, what a story of marriage. I guess I find myself drawn to stories of difficult marriages, and my second book was about Elaine de Kooning, and that was another one.
Final question, slightly more specific one. What do you think Hardwick's intentions were with Sleepless Nights? What was she trying to do with this very unusual book, which is hard to classify, and it's partly what makes it such a great book? But how would you describe her intentions behind this work?
Well, she was trying to gather the bits and pieces of life that she had observed and to make sense of them. Once again, there's someone, from the cleaners that she had in Maine to a couple she knew in Amsterdam. When you know the life, you can't help but find this in Sleepless Nights. But she was, in her elusive way, just knitting together, I think, the bits and pieces of the lives that she had observed. And, she was at a point where she was able, Lowell had died, and she was just sort of gathering her life together, and she was able to ruminate on sort of everything she'd seen and heard and understood.
Well, thank you very much, Cathy. I think this is the moment we can bring it to a close. I'd like to thank the Leon Levy Institute and Shelby White for making this possible. And it was, for me at least, a great pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ian. It was a pleasure for me as well.